at TST at the University of Toronto. He was the executive director of Faith in the Common Good, an interfaith intercultural network seeking the common good in Canada. Also, he is the program minister for education and leadership at the General Council of the United Church of Canada, and most recently, the coordinating minister at St. Paul's Centre in Aurelia. He's married to Audrey Baines, and together they have 6 adult children plus significant others, and now 4 grandchildren. He enjoys many outdoor activities like running, skiing, kayaking, and riding his motorcycle. And the Very Reverend Bill Phipps is the former moderator of the United Church from '97 until 2000. He served in 2 congregations in Toronto and 1 in Calgary. He has represented the United Church on various human rights and justice matters in Central America, East Timor, Philippines, South Sudan, Congo, and Israel-Palestine. The focus in his ministry has been community organizing, social justice, and peace building. With Ted Reeve, he co-founded Faith in the Common Good. He's a member of the City of Calgary Climate Panel, member of the Calgary Climate Hub, and Calgary Citizens on Climate Change. He's currently retired, living in Calgary with writer Carolyn Pogg, and with children and grandchildren in Yellowknife, Winnipeg, and Toronto. And we welcome both Ted and Bill this morning, and I'm just going to turn it over to them.
Hey, thank you for that nice introduction, Colleen, and wonderful to be here with folks. I'm going to put up the slides that I want to show. Is that there for folks? All right, so this is an incredible challenge to try and talk about these big issues in a very condensed amount of time, but I'll speak as quickly and succinctly as I can, and Bill will as well. So Bill and I have been working on this idea of EcoCommoning for 20 years or so through Faith in the Common Good, and this is our current iteration of language that helps us describe a different future that we want, a down-to-earth way of life, down-to-earth accentuating our new interconnection with the planet and with each other, and a way of life as the ethics of how we want to live. Let's see. So for us, EcoCommoning is about being local, about being cooperative, about being sustainable. It's a relational approach rather than individual. It's a relational approach to how we work together on all of these dimensions of interaction and economic and social life. In these 3 presentations, I want to, in this first one, accentuate the importance of language, metaphor, framing as a way that's really important in how change happens, and so give some theory on that. In the second one, I want to look at our deep history through a cognitive lens, different way of looking at history, and so approach that subject and what we can learn from it. And in the third one, accentuate what EcoCommoning is and how it can lead us into the future. The challenges, as good United Church people, these are probably top of mind to us. Of course, the current pandemic, capitalism and neoliberalism, are they the systems that we want to organize our economic life around? The National Geographic's cover on how we'll survive or not survive the next 50 years in relation to ecological questions. And in the upper right corner, image of more empty pews. How is our faith life and religion responding to these challenges? The lower, our governance models, what's working and not working there. So we have some serious challenges and that we have up in the air and want to look differently at. I think we're in a liminal time, a time of great transformation. And how do we take the challenges and turn them into opportunities that can take us to a different future? How do we change by using our language and metaphors and frames from our current dominant worldview into an EcoCommoning way of life? Bill and I, working together in the early 2000s, developed the Greening Sacred Spaces program, and we linked with David Suzuki and the Nature Challenge. And this was a shift from responding angrily to issues to what do we do to help the planet and each other to move into a more ecological age. And so the goofy guy in the right-hand corner is me promising David that I would go out and talk to faith communities about how we could sign up to this nature challenge and consciously work for change. So I'd go out and talk to faith communities and a couple hundred people at a time, and I'd get back 2 or 3 of these commitments to the nature challenge. So this was both embarrassing, but why wasn't change happening? Why didn't people respond and get on board with the change that we needed? So I've been puzzling about this. And I was helped in this puzzling by George Lakoff and the notion of framing. And liberals like me, he says, have no idea that language is not neutral, it's framed. We have this perception that if we just have the facts out there, that people will absorb the facts and change, but that's not actually what happens. We have this deep framing sense of self that I'll explain here. So what's a frame? It's a mental structure that shapes and is shaped, and it's how we look at the world. Our use of frames is mostly unconscious and automatic. So 98%, Lakoff says, of how we look at the world runs through this unconscious listening. So when you're listening to me, you're running it through this frame of how you see the world. And so we only have a small capacity to change this frame. And that's why change is so hard. We have to work really hard to change this fundamental orientation. He talks about this in this book, Don't Think of an Elephant. So if I say, don't think of an elephant, of course you think of an elephant, right? It's that, and he points out that conservatives in the United States are very effective at using language that is provocative to people and makes them think, even in a negative way. So unless we're conscious of how frames work, then others will frame the conversation for us, and we have to be intentional about how we use it. For Lakoff, there's 3 different kinds of frames, 2 dominant ones, a progressive frame and a conservative frame, and a mixed frame in between those who have both these progressive and conservative views. And it's this middle group that is the group that politicians are addressing in election cycles, trying to sway them one way or another. So in his definition of conservative frame is this strict father. He uses family groupings or understanding. So the world is a scary place. It needs moral authority. It's hierarchical. Father knows best. I don't know about you folks, but growing up in the 50s and 60s, this kind of father knows best was the dominant way of how we understood male-female, parent-child relations and so on. So I'm a product of that kind of framing. When I Googled what a strict father looks like, guess who showed up? On a progressive side, nurturant parent is this other definition, that the world is a good place, that children are good and need to be encouraged, and empathy and responsibility are the modus operandi. For me, this was when I was a parent in the 80s and 90s, this was the frame that was coming into play, but it was hard because I grew up in a strict father consciousness. And so these are kind of competing emphases in progressive and conservative understanding. For Lakoff, Elizabeth Warren represented a more progressive viewpoint. So how do we get these frames? Well, when we're born, we are unformed in our brain patterns. And in the first 6 months, we sort things, and neural pathways are formed as we pick up our parents' language. And then through our early childhood development, we developed by the community around us and their context. And we develop either in a progressive or a conservative frame. So when we look at brain science, we see the evolution over our first 20, 24 years of life as our brain forms these neural pathways, and we're framed in how we look at the world. So for those of us who are beyond 24, it's hard work to change these neural pathways. It's not that it's impossible, but it's a hard piece of work that has to be consciously worked at. So change is hard in this recognition. So in simple understandings, on the conservative side, there's an orientation more towards free market, less government, socially conservative, free trade. And on the progressive side is kind of more generally where the United Church is on a liberal, social democratic, capitalist perspective with a managed economy. Governments have a strong role, and more socially liberal. So we come at it, and so when we're talking with people of differing perspectives, they're running these perspectives through how they hear a conversation. So is it possible to reframe, to change our metaphors? The dominant worldview in the West that certainly is in my head is that humans are inherently self-serving or even selfish, the notion of survival of the fittest, it's a competitive world, dog eat dog, the consumer ethic that we've all grown up with about consumerism will make us happy, and the notion of free market capitalism. So that it underlies most of how we look at the world. What we're trying to promote is this EcoCommoning or relational look at the world. Humans are primarily relational. Happiness comes through our generosity, through loving and being loved, that everything is interconnected. The golden rule of all religious traditions about serving others and them serving us in a mutual relationship. The green rule in relation to our evolutionary connection with each other. So that's a quick run through framing and why change is so hard to achieve, but that it's the work that we're about. Bill, do you want to comment on this?
Sorry, Bill, you're muted. I tried to unmute you, but somebody else must have too.
Right, there we go. Aha, now I'm unmuted. Here we are. Anyway, yeah, just a quick thing. I think this is a great time to be alive and to be the church. I spend most of my time these days on various kinds of climate action. And for a long time, people were wondering what's a religious leader doing in all these meetings and all these demonstrations and etc. And pretty soon they discovered, I keep saying that it's the crisis we're in is a spiritual and ethical crisis. And people of all walks of life are beginning to understand that. And the pause that we've got with the pandemic is allowing people time to really question what kind of a world we've got. And they don't want to go back to the way it was, but what is the way forward? So I think it's a great time to be the church and in our communities. People are looking for an alternative to extreme individualism. So they're looking for community, for being together relationally, as Ted was saying. They're recognizing the huge disparity of income and possibilities in our world. So they're looking for equity rather than disparity. And the one that I'm so excited about is people are looking to respect and honor Mother Earth rather than plunder Mother Earth, which is what we've been doing for such a long time. And words that come to mind that people are yearning to see expressed in our common life are words like gratitude and humility. And we see such contrast to humility in some of our leaders, particularly to the South and other places. But people are looking for an alternative to that. They're looking for respect, for justice, for love, for ceremony. And because people are yearning for something different, faith community's job is to provide alternative visions, or alternative framing for how we see the world and live in the world. And EcoCommoning is a way that we think responds to some of these things. Years ago, I came across this fabulous quotation from Al Gore. And I just keep using it because it expresses where I think we are. He says this crisis is bringing us an opportunity to experience what few generations in history ever have the privilege of knowing: a generational mission, the acceleration of a compelling moral purpose, a shared and unified cause, the thrill of being forced by circumstances. Doesn't that describe where we are? The thrill of being forced by circumstances to put aside the pettiness and conflict that so often stifle the restless human need for transcendence. I think that says exactly where we are and what people are yearning for. I'll just close this little segment by quoting Rabbi Abraham Heschel, who said that, and this is great too, I think, our goal should be to live in radical amazement. Isn't that wonderful? And I think our faith communities, if they express that, we would be bringing people together into a whole new way of being. And one of them is EcoCommoning.
Unmute there. So in your discussion groups that you're going to break into, can you acknowledge what's the dominant frame in your worldview? And are you struggling with finding new language to describe the world we want to be in? And are you able to see a way through the current challenges to the other side? So take some time and reflect on those parts of what we've been talking about.
Okay, I've set you up into rooms. I'm about to open the rooms. You can access the chat. Recall when you are when you're in your breakout rooms, and you can take your notes, but whoever's taking the notes for you, you're going to need to copy them, so then bring them back and paste them